this is the panel. Today we will try to understand a little bit what is the status quo of the cloud computing skills, mainly in Europe. Okay? Today, as Carla has already introduced, and also with different interviews, we have realized that there is quite a skill gap in Europe regarding this kind of technologies. And even if we just go into what the digital compass, what Europe is aiming, we see numbers like for 2030, they want that 80% of all the adults in Europe, they should have at least basic digital skills. Okay, and they are also aiming for a workforce of 20 million skilled experts in Europe. Yesterday we have the CDO from Spain here. He was also a little bit introducing what was the state of what's the target for Spain, and he also mentioned this 80% of basic skills in Europe. Later on, I took my time just to have a look at what is in the digital agenda for Spain, and I was a bit surprised saying that we already have 60% of the adults with basic skills in Spain. I was saying, "Whoa, this is true." I don't think so. Yeah, I agree with that. But he was saying we have only 20% just for the next 8 to 10 years. So the question here is: are the ICT professionals ready for cloud computing? Okay. So today probably we'll have some answers. Probably not all the answers that we would like to, but I mean we'll probably have a very rich discussions. So if I would like to take the opportunity to introduce my panelists, I am very glad to count with Carla Arend. Well, you already know her. She's from IDC. So I will give you a minute to introduce yourself. Just forgive me if I am it's Poortvliet or something like that. Okay. He's from NextCloud, and Rowan. He's not only coming from BluSpecs, but he's also co-chairs of the BDBA Dario, isn't it? Skills. Skills. So before we start with the discussions, I will just invite my great panelists just to introduce in a minute what they would like to say about themselves, and later on we will just go directly into the discussion. Okay, Carla, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Yes, my name is Carla Arend, and I head up IDC's cloud research for Europe. And I've been with IDC for more than 20 years, following the IT industry. I started just at the .com crash, or boom and then crash, which was some interesting years, and really enjoy being part of the IT industry and watching it closely.
Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Poortvliet. I started out as a business consultant quite some time ago, recovered and got into open source technology, and then ended up at various companies like Linux and NextCloud. Today, where we're developing, we're essentially software vendors or small medium enterprise, building an application that runs on top of all the clouds that we're talking about here. And so we see at our customers, of course, the kind of challenges they have in finding the right people in the right times in the right place.
Finally, Brenda.
I'm still a consultant, I haven't been informed yet. So I'm managing consultant from BluSpecs. We support the adoption of advanced technologies within the public and private sector. I lead up the technology policy and skills area of activities that we do. I have recently been named co-chair of skills at BDBA Dairo, so we're going to be looking at over the next few years the evolution of AI demand and robotics demand in those areas. And until recently, at the end of last year, I was leading the Secretariat for the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition, so giving a bit of an overview of what's happening in each country, which is why when our ministro in Spain tells us that we're doing very well, I have a bit of hesitance in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in fact, when we are just going through the numbers, we see that this is still a long way to go until we reach this 80% of the basic skills. So, well, according to what my schedule, I will first provide one question each, and then later on, yes, we will evolve from the results of your answers. Okay. I also have some questions, personal questions that I would like just to make. So the first one will be for Jos. You were the first one, and I'm sorry, that's to be the one that breaks the ice. The thing here is that we also, apart from being in NextCloud, I think that even because you are in NextCloud, you are also just contributing in what is called the European SME Alliance, isn't it?
Digital SME Alliance.
Digital SME Alliance, which is good because for one time you see the SMEs which are just working together, just trying just to fill the gap out regarding also skills that they need for bringing those. So my question here, I mean, I've seen here in you just wrote the website of the Digital Alliance. They say that there's a deficit of 1 million workers probably in Europe. And I think that they are also you are already going through how to close this gap. You have already had some activities, and I have already seen that they are also providing some training courses. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Digital SME also, there are of course many small medium enterprise organizations in Europe, and they collaborate to some degree. So Digital SME focuses on companies building digital technology, small medium enterprises doing that, so that includes a lot of cloud vendors of course, but also software vendors like ourselves. So an interesting statistic I bumped into a short while ago is that BitMe, so the German kind of SME organization, they estimated that the cost for the German economy of the lack of digital skills was about 10 billion. I'm sure you have better statistics there, but I thought it was a rather painful number. That's a lot of money. And if you see what we see as our company, and of course what other organizations see, is that it is hard to hire good people. I mean, in your keynote you showed like why do cloud deployments fail, and there was 20% lack of skills. I mean, if you look at some of the other points, I think they also have a lot to do with skills. So I think it's a clear and widespread problem, and of course it's limiting Europe's ability to play in this market. Everything is going digital, and Germany have the car industry, and I mean, it's already today that the digital component of a car is more important almost than the mechanical part, and this trend is just accelerating. We're losing, if you don't have the people who can build this digital component, then the German car industry will no longer be the engine of the economy 10 or 20 years from now. This is of course, not good for the German economy, and of course in Europe in general it's not good. So digital SME, of course, it's a little harder, I think, to really get together and do these things, because big companies, they can put an entire department on working on lobbying or on training and these things. For small companies this is harder. This is a role that digital SME tries to fulfill. And so we do three things. There is a work group, skills. This is essentially just a place where the small and medium enterprises can discuss with each other and come up with initiatives, ideas, but also try and help each other. Second thing is we try to collect resources. So there are a lot of online resources, of course, where you can build your skills, and we hope to provide this to our businesses to help them enable their employees to learn. Because one of the things that small companies have trouble with is do upskilling and reskilling of people. Again, bigger companies, they have a training program, a training department. If you have 60 employees, you don't have a training budget. You don't have somebody who tries to guide people's work, career, and the things they do. And we ourselves as a company, we've had trainees who came, like we had a trainee who was a barista before. So there is definitely place for lateral thinking there, and people coming in from other industries. But SMEs are hardly, they're hardly equipped to provide this. And that's a problem, of course, because 2/3 of the employment in Europe is in SMEs. So 2/3 of the people work in a company that has trouble having dedicated resources for reskilling. And this is something where, of course, this is SME as an organization, we try to do something here, but I think there's also roles for government and other organizations, universities, schools, to try and pitch in.
Yeah, I think that I must agree. As also been in a startup, and I will later on just share my thoughts about how difficult it is for startups just to go into this type of business. Yeah. Okay, so this is the time for Brendan. Brendan, I also just rose in when we talked before a little bit about what are the numbers. How do you just mentioned that it's a little bit obsolete, but we will start what we have now. What we have is you say that about 50% of the organizations, they say that they have difficulties when they are trying to recruit skilled staff, especially for physical computing. This is what we are discussing today. So also from your perspective, and also now that you are also co-chair of the BDBA,
Just
still, how do you feel? How are the organizations doing just to try to hire the people or to hire the people that they hire inside the companies? And if there is something that BDBA is doing, we would also like to know.
Yeah, I think everyone's aware that the talent is not there at the moment. Is that we're all competing across everything. So from people who are laying bricks to people who are building the next chips. Exactly. The whole of Europe has a different problem with skills and with talent, and we're all competing with each other for the same areas in that way. The problem that we have when we come to digital skills, and AI kind of brings you to the kind of pinnacle, towards the pinnacle of that, is that that's a long-term build-up. It requires, school, university, building towards that. And that's one of the challenges that everyone's finding, that when you realise you have the problem, I think, Carla, you've highlighted a few times, it's too late. And I think that's the problem that you keep finding yourself. And the mechanisms that the digital SME Alliance are bringing in to fill that gap are important, but also I feel like we're chasing ourselves behind. The question of how industry is dealing with it depends on the level of specialism and the urgency. So you kind of have your, the high specialists in AI that you're going to need because you are trying to build the next technology, the next platform, the next whatever it is. You have the intermediate people who need to manipulate, use, and then you have the final piece, which are the users of AI in that way. And at the top, really, and this is something that we've seen across Europe, is that's fighting for academic people. So a lot of the universities are having people stripped away from them, and that creates a vicious cycle where the next talent or generation talent isn't coming through. And I know Germany has just launched, 50 new professorships in this area that should hopefully help sort it out. But the reality is that for the industry to compete with those people, they have to have deep pockets, they have to offer big salaries, because people who aren't even finished their PhDs are being offered $150,000 to move to the US. You have to offer them intellectual stimulation, so you have to give them the freedom for them to explore what they want to explore in this area in the field, and then give them the resources to do that. And that's very expensive and very difficult, and that is essentially competition at the top. When you go into the middle ground, you tend to see a bit of a difference in strategy. So either you can outsource through collaboration, so you can build out networks and things like NextCloud, and access talents that exist in other areas, be it with universities, be it with other companies, be it that kind of pooling of resources in that area. The other thing is bringing in expertise from non-traditional talent pools, if that makes sense. So going outside of where they'd normally hire, going outside of Europe, specifically India, to bring in talent that they wouldn't normally address in that area, to fill that gap in that way. And then the other area was within bringing in tools and processes. So when we go a bit further down, bringing the tools and processes that remove the skills needs. And I think that's something we can talk about later, but the fact is that you have the pull of the technology that makes you feel like the gap is huge, but as the years go on, the tools come into place and the user interfaces come into place that make it much more accessible and much more useful in that area. And at the bottom level, of course, you bring in, you kind of do two things. The large companies, I think the example we saw earlier was Telefonica in Spain, is putting millions and millions into upskilling broad groups of people for the future benefit of the economy and of their own sector. But when you need it immediately, you have to go to universities and grab some young interns, grab some people who are able to do it and train them up, and do that investment and train them up and building up those processes as well. And anecdotally, I know a lot of small companies and startups that have to really get in early with these people. And an example I have is a friend of mine has a startup based in London. They take space data, match it with photos of a house to do 3D diagrams of what you can build on that house plot and what you can't, and then what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. It's a planning thing. And what they've actually done is gone to my other friend's younger brother who was studying in a technical college in Ireland and dragged him over to London. And that's how they got the talent that they had to get. And it's at a smaller scale, when you're looking at the cutting edge, you have to do that kind of thing as well. So I hope I've done it, because it kind of there's 3 layers of competition and strategies that we see across different organizations. But the reality is it depends on your urgency, it depends on how much money you have, and it depends on the time, the skills that you need to have.
Thanks, and I also think that is probably Carla also comment on that. So it's about the culture that we already have. Because when you mentioned the initiative by Telefonica, there is also one center in which is called the 42 case, and when I talk to the students that they would like us to go to the university, they still do not think that they will have the same degree as if they go for studying ICT. So it's still like this need to make this cultural change and that kind of thing.
One of the things that constantly needs to be reinforced is that digital skills are practical skills. They're not theoretical unless you're at the top. They're vocational. And just like a language, if you don't use it, you lose it. And you have to apply that area in skills well. And we probably need to change how we view where skills come from. And also address more about literacy and less about programming, and build those scenarios there as well.
Yeah, we will come back to this later. Carla, you don't need to be introduced, they already know you. So here, also my question was a little bit probably outdated, because I will give a very good keynote here. And so you already just introduced things about this, because it was this 20% digital skill gap. And also, I would like you, if you can elaborate a little bit more about the gender gap also in these ICT industries, more precisely with the digital skills.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I'm seeing is that because everyone agrees that we have the skills gap, there is a big push from also the cloud providers to close that gap and to have these educational programs. And they have very ambitious plans in place to train people, right? But one of the challenges, I think, is that these trainings are typically vendor specific, right? So you get certifications, and then you're an expert in one cloud vendor, and then you want to switch company, and they are running on a different platform, and you can maybe use some of your training, but not all of it. And one of my colleagues, he gave the analogy with the driver's license, right? When you take a driver's license, you take a driver's license for any car, right? You're not tied to a specific brand. Yet, especially in the cloud training, you're tied to one provider typically. And I think that's maybe one of the risks, because on the one hand side, of course, it's great that they are investing so much money in training people, but on the other hand, there's also a little bit of a lock-in situation into a specific skill set, right? And I think if we want to lift the industry, then we need to have also more these broad skills. I think is one of the points I wanted to raise. So having like a driver's license for cloud that applies to everything, and maybe we are going to get there at some point. And I think the universities and schools and public programs are going there, but it's not enough, right? We need everyone to pull in that direction. But to your question about the gender gap, from our research, what we found is that in Europe, I think 34% of any IT department are women at the moment. So one third roughly, and that is behind North America, but even also behind Asia. So in Europe, it's actually the lowest rate. I mean, it's only a couple of percentage points, so it's not like a dramatic difference, but still it shows you a trend that in Europe, actually, we have the lowest number of females in IT, which is also a challenge. And then if we look at leadership, then it's 37%, I think, of the leadership in Europe is female at the moment, and again behind US and Asia in these numbers. So there is a gap, and so when you say alternative talent pools, I would put women as one of these talent pools there. Because it's a great industry to work in for women, but it's just from the outside it just doesn't look like it. Yeah.
I hear lots of negative things about how, there's still a lot of, I don't want to say, a pleasant work environment sometimes. I mean, of course there's a lot of scandals coming out all the time in all kinds of businesses, but IT is, it's definitely in the list of industries where we still have issues with that. I wonder, like with the numbers that you say, like, are there differences in what roles there are? Because I can very much, I don't know, I see this in our company too, that there are certain roles where women gravitate towards, which again is probably not really because they want to, because it's just the whole environment thing.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to go a little bit deeper, but this was just a high-level question that we asked at this stage. But we want to dig deeper into that space.
It was a point that I wanted to bring up. Behind that statistic of women in IT, because we've looked at various initiatives in this area, and although women are categorised as IT professionals, they often tend to be in the managerial, sales, marketing space, and less in the nuts and bolts. And I think that's something that does need to be unpicked, as you say. I think it does to fully represent what the actual challenge is. Because I know personally all my friends who are women who work in IT are in project management roles, are in marketing and sales roles, etc., or even doing documentation, and they've no other men in the documentation department. So I think it's something we do need to unpick as well to really know the full challenge of meeting them.
I think 38 sounds actually optimistic, honestly. I don't know, my feeling is also the gap is bigger, but again, it depends on the industry and the sub-industry, and maybe it's better in cloud, maybe it's worse in, open source, where we are an open source company and it's particularly bad in the open source community. This is also a known issue. So I get there are a lot of variety there, and maybe there are lessons to be taken from one area to another. They say, hey, why did it work in this area? It's not like documentation isn't quite technical. I know quite some people who went from development to documentation. This is not that you don't need technical skills for it, at least in IT documentation. So, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's definitely an area that we also want to dive deeper in, because we need to understand the problem better to solve it.
Very interesting discussion. I have a couple of subjects that I would like us to tackle. One of them is when we have already just also interviewed people or stakeholders or time to understand how they will react regarding this skill gap. If they was saying like, okay, you realize that you have a skill gap, what are you doing, and what do you think should be done so that this gap is closed? We got very surprising answers. Some of them they even bother about that. Others say that they just want to recruit ICT professionals and they will just provide them the skills, which it links a little bit with what you were saying about the rock stars. Probably you can just comment a little bit later. The problem is that nowadays, I don't know in your companies, but in the companies that the people, especially the youngsters, are moving. Yes, you cannot just engage them to be for a long time in your company. So it's whenever they have another offer, and if it's a better pay or better conditions, and sometimes if it is fully remote, it's also a good thing for them. They just go. I mean, they don't want to stay in a company for the whole life. So they just their mindset has changed. So that's I mean, even if you put money, if you just allow them just to go to this to get these credits from the different, I don't know, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or wherever. There is not a guarantee that they will remain in your company. Okay, so you are still just like continuously training your people. Then we went to the university, and then they asked them if they are going just to update their courses. the subjects that they provide in there, and they are a little bit like futuristic, saying, well, this is what we have now. We might be changing subjects in 2, 3, 5 years. So they are moving slowly than what the market is demanding. I know that the other initiative that the market is responding, I know from you, but when you just go to the SMEs or you ask them, do you know if there are things they don't know about that? They are like hopeless. I mean, this is what we have. Especially SMEs would have some money, but startups, they don't have any money at all. And they need it because most of them they would like to scale. They want to have a lot of customers and they need the cloud for that. But they don't have the skills and they know how to recruit. And if they need to recruit them, they will be very expensive. So I know that probably this doesn't have an easy answer, but I wanted to see what's your opinion about that.
I think one of the problems is that one of the big promises of cloud is cost saving, right? You have a potentially more cost efficient infrastructure that will drive down your costs, but then you have to spend all the money on the experts, right, to run and operate this. So in the end, it's not really necessarily cheaper because cloud engineers, cloud architects, they still come at quite a premium pay. And so anything you save on the technology platform, you then invest into salaries, which is good for the people that earn the salaries, but it's not so good for you as a company. And especially in SMEs, like you said, they don't have much money to spend. So that's one of the problems. I think the other problem is that the people who have these skills that everyone wants to hire, they are being treated like rock stars, right? Oh, we hired this person and they are like amazing and they are going to change everything for this company. But no, they're just one person, right? So they need to become part of a team. They need to transfer their knowledge and skills. They need to build a team that stands behind them, because one person, single person, cannot change the whole company or the whole cloud strategy. But we have this view that there's this one person, and they can do it all. But it's usually not how it works in reality. And then once they've joined, they move on already. Right? So they hardly stay long enough to make a real impact. So I think there's this culture that glorifies people who actually have these top skills, and I think it's much more healthy if we have a broader pool to pick from, right? And then salaries will be at manageable levels, and we can build teams that do stuff and solve problems rather than focusing on this one person.
Because one person might also only be skilled in, Amazon ECS or Google Cloud or Azure, and then every nail will, or everything looks like a nail, and everything will be on that cloud. And the multi-cloud strategy, I think, is also becoming really important, and a hybrid cloud, and that requires a whole other level of skills, because you need to then build a local cloud and maintain a remote cloud and connect it to this. This is a huge requirement if you put it on one person. I don't think we have many such unicorns who can manage, between Amazon and Google and Microsoft and the local cloud and the Ionos data center. This is just not feasible. You need to have these skills spread. Yeah, it's definitely an issue. I also have some thoughts on the hiring. We as a company, we're in a luxury situation in a way, because in open source, a lot of people are idealistically motivated, and we very much, as a company ourselves, cater to that audience. But of course, for a lot of other companies, that's just not the case. And you really have to. I think a lot of other companies. You mentioned that people move on very quickly, and this is a sign of the times. And youth is not interested in staying in companies, and I'm not entirely sure of that. I think it's also a matter of that older companies, they used to build loyalty, and I think modern companies are also not very good at that. It might not be the people, it might also be the organizations themselves. If you fire people easily, don't be surprised that if they get a better offer, they will leave. I think there's a give and take there, and I think organizations can really do better, companies can do better taking care of their people. I've heard anecdotes, of course, of people, especially in the COVID times, we had somebody who halfway their probate site, their test time, the 6 months here in Germany, their mother got sick, and they wanted to go visit mom, and the boss just said no to the time off request. I think, what are you thinking as a company? You know, that's just insane. That's just, you're not sure that person will stay for another week to do the work that you wanted them to do while they're looking for another job, because they're not going to stay with you. You might have lost a great employee, and the company that hires them and says, oh, and if you first need 2 weeks off to go to your mother, that company, they will not leave there. You know? This is, I think, a lot of companies are missing this aspect. It makes a difference how you treat your employees. And, yeah.
That's very severe scenario, but it just happened. I don't think it's happened. I think what you have to, I think kind of marrying the 2 points you both made there, I think you have to see yourself as part of the bigger picture, that you are training someone up, because they may be with you for only 2 years, 1 year, 5 years, but you will also then benefit from someone else who's come from also. So it's about your group contribution to the global talent pool. I think that's something that's very important in that area. I also think it is very risky. I think what you were mentioning there, Carla, was drawing parallels between the CEO problem that we have at the moment, where CEOs are brought in after 2 years, they're cut out, and the whole strategy and the whole organisation has to change again and again and again, and then we spend the whole cycle spending loads of money on these people at the top, and actually the whole organisation at the bottom is just in chaos permanently for 10 years. I think one of the things that we need to do in terms of addressing the skills is not seeing it as a now problem. We need to understand it's a dynamic, and I think this is where I was getting at when I was saying the statistics that we have on AI demand. And sorry, I come from also the next generation IoT initiatives. I'm also coming in from the edge point of view, coming into the cloud, federating, bringing all the different the microservices involved as well. And what is the skill needed today and what is going to be needed in 2 years is very different. And I think what we need to look for is how tools and interfaces I mentioned earlier is really going to change how our organizations actually implement the technologies. Because 10 years ago, cloud computing was not accessible to someone like me who has a science degree, not an engineering degree. But I can just jump onto AWS, I've got myself set up, I've set up my container, I've set up my storage, I'm able to load in my data, and I'm able to do it without knowing anything about programming. And that's happening at the other end as well, and it's going to continue happening. And what we need to also focus on is not so much the hard skills, but the people who have the knowledge of the application and of what they're trying to achieve, so they're able to critically assess what's actually being produced, but also critically assess what's going into it as well. And whereas the actual technology that we're talking about, be it cloud, be it AI, be it whatever it is actually just an application that we're integrating, that we're tool that we're able to run through, and building that relationship where young people who are not tech specialists but are business specialists and have more tech capacity, rather than trying to go tech capacity down to business point of view. And of course we still need the leading edge in the IT department to do that, and the IT specialists in that area, but I think that's going to reduce, maybe not reduce, it's going to shift focus. It's always going to stay just the same as spending on cloud is never going to go down, but the amount of data that we're going to process is going to increase by incredible amounts. So I'm processing one of those.
It's also interesting to see how organizations are going to deal with the problem, right? So in our survey they said 40% of organizations said we're actually going to give our operations to an external third party because we can't deal with it, right? We can't hire the people, we can't deal with the complexity. And 60% were saying, well, we expect actually that our headcounts are going to increase at the same level as our spend on applications and data, which is quite a fast rate, right? So different ways to dealing with it. Some are trying to push the problem in another part of the market, but it's still the same problem, right? While others, they absorb the challenge in-house.
It needs to be decoupled, that the idea that more tech needs more people. It needs to be somehow decoupled in terms of the operation side of businesses.
That's the whole problem of the cloud, right? That it scales more. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, as you say, like what you just said, the statistic that a lot of companies think that their spending and the headcount go one-on-one. That means that this promise of scaling is working the way it should. There is a gap there, and these external companies, are they, like if you outsource it, does that scale better also from a cost perspective?
Business on being efficient, right? So they should have put in place the automation, and they should have the automation experts to run a fully automated platform.
So then, if that is what you say, then 60% of the companies is making the wrong choice.
Yeah, you could say that, I guess.
I mean, that's
maybe they can also implement automation inside. Right?
Of course,
So,
yeah, exactly.
so that's also an option. But we've been saying that automation is the way forward in IT for many years, right? Not just the last 5 years, but it's always been the answer. And organizations are notoriously not implementing it. Right? They're a bit scared of automation because they say, okay, if I super automate, I don't understand all these unintended consequences. So they're actually a bit scared of automation still. But if we want to reach the cloud scale and if we want to decouple, as you said, the application and data from infrastructure, then we need automation. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer, but hopefully now people will actually adopt it also in their own organizations.
exactly.
Its promise is the next level of federated architecture, federated learning to use our local models and in theory that should help us scale it up in theory, but of course we need skills for that. We need the skills because that still isn't got it's people who are familiar, it's still in universities, let's put it that way, it's still in the university space, it's still more theoretical. And of course Europe, we love theory, we love setting the goal, as you will see some of the exhibitors here today. But the reality is that cloud is easy. It's easy to use, and if I'm a CTO in a large company and I have to decide between completely undoing the investment of the last 10 years to bring in a whole new architecture and a whole new way of approaching our technology stack compared to my team of 200 people right now, they just are all just working away. Why would I stop that? And I think that's the problem now as well, is getting over that inertia, because they will have said, well, we've just put, and I think the example that we put is in the last 2 years there's been a huge acceleration of European corporates moving onto hyperscalers. So you had the whole of Carrefour, who've been leaders in data and cloud. I think they moved on to Google. You had Siemens move on to Microsoft. Siemens has been peddling its own cloud for decades. So it's very tricky now that we have that investment made to get people to go into the next level of adoption without having a groundswell of the skills around it, that people are willing to make that risk and to say it's worth it, that investment's worth it. But it does come down to the barrier of inertia and the fear of losing prior investment, which has been in the billions and billions and billions, which I'm sure you've counted many times. And you're seeing small organisations. I think small organisations, we have to play a role. We just have to find our tools and what works for us as a company, because we can't compete. We can't compete. We just have to find the ways to work within the market that's been set up around us.
Well, just at this point, even in this session, we've been talking mostly about the hyperscalers. Okay? We're talking about Google, about Amazon, we're talking about Microsoft, and even talk about Alibaba, for instance. But now we have the challenge of Gaia X, okay? In Europe, that everyone wants that to become a reality, and it's probably it's not my personal view, but I think that it would require a lot of skilled people in Europe to collaborate in that, to make Gaia X reality. As we heard yesterday, they were saying we don't have to wait until Gaia X provides the standards. Yes, do it now. We have the tools, we have everything, we have to make it a reality. And now the thing is, do we have everything? Do we have the skilled people that we need? Or that the people that they are there, they will still work for the other hyperscalers, because the industry in Europe is still, the number that I got yesterday, that was 80% of all the data in Europe is stored in US data centers. Okay? So even it's still there, all our data is there, and remember that you have the US Act. Now we are just going for the European Data Act, but that's a different story. So that the question here is, if we like to make this GaiaX a reality, how we can convince those skilled people that currently are working for the hyperscalers just to switch and work for the GaiaX initiative or something similar.
Yeah.
The purchaser has to be the one to drive it. The people who are using the cloud have to insist that they want it to be held in a certain way and they want it to benefit from it. That's why I see it has to pulled, because GaiaX it's not a tech push, but it's a lot of people talking. It's a lot of people talking about a lot of things, and I think everyone knows what they have to do. And I think what we're also seeing is big organizations talk about data mesh. European academics talk about data spaces. And we're kind of doing that again. We're kind of spreading away from how people see it within industry and how we see it from outside the industry. I think if we're going to get change, if we're going to achieve change in that, realising that idea, it has to be by consumer demand. I'm not talking about B2C stuff, I'm talking about the companies that are requiring the services. They need to want it and they need to ask for it, because otherwise there's no reason for it. It has to be a business case, or at least a higher calling to those people for buying it and put it forward.
I like the higher calling thing, because what you were talking earlier is we need a whole new level of innovation after maybe the hyperscalers, after current cloud. So maybe that's where the solution lies to this, because same in AI, yes, the salaries are one of the reasons why people go to America, but the other reason is that's where the interesting stuff is happening. So maybe the solution here is to do the interesting stuff. I don't want to say that GaiaX is or is not that. I mean, there's, I think, work to be done there, because it seems to be more replicating the existing, hyperscalers, but then in a decentralized way. It's already an interesting challenge. But I think that maybe a solution to the question of how do we get the people back is to do something interesting, to do this in an interesting way. I mean, decentralization is interesting, but to bring in this new level of technology that is needed might be also a motivation for people to come back to Europe and for innovation to be fostered here again. So in the end, that's, I think, what we need. If there's no innovation, I mean, I want to work in an interesting place. I think most people do, I mean, sure, salary plays a role, but there's a certain level where you want to work for Google because it's Google, not because they give a massive salary. You want to work for Amazon because it's Amazon. And I think we don't have that in Europe. So if we were at the forefront of technology, the way Google is, then people would also want to come back to Europe and work here. Now, I don't know how we make that happen, because that's a whole different challenge. But there's a lot of innovation happening in Europe. Maybe that's where the SMEs can play a role, because a lot of that innovation is at small and medium companies. And because this is not a clear target, right? I mean, Google is just one company, and it does a lot of innovation. But if you dig into it, a lot of that innovation is because they buy small companies when the real work happens. And my spouse at some point worked at a company that was developing some interesting technology that later ended up in the Google smartphone. So the innovation was contracted out. So maybe one of the things we need to do is to explain to people that actually maybe Google is not the place to innovate. Maybe it is at one of the many smaller companies that's doing interesting things in Europe, unfortunately at the moment before they get bought. But maybe we need to create an environment where these companies don't have to try to get off, but where they can thrive. And that's where you need a level playing field, and this is something that we as a company encounter as well. There's just not really a level playing field when you're playing against hyperscalers. I mean, I don't think we need to explain that, right? This is not a level playing field. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they force their technology on people in various ways. There's not a real choice as a consumer, as you said, as a business. I mean, does Siemens have a choice moving away from what they're using right now? They don't, not really, partially the skills. They are all trained now on this one tech stack and they don't know anything else. But partially also because it's designed that way. And I think this is where the EU and maybe also the Digital Market Act can, who knows, play a role to create a level playing field. And Europe can actually build an alternative. Because I think that, as you said, it's not the standards, it's not a technology problem. It's a problem that goes much wider than that. It's partially political, it's partially market forces at work. And scale has benefits, but I don't think that Google wins because it's bigger. I don't think that beyond the owners of OVH, there is another 30% scale benefit to be had. I mean, I'm not super technical, but I find that hard to believe that once you have 5 massive data centers, that just because you have a 6, the cost go down by 20%. That's not how it works. I don't believe that. So the reason for these giants is something else. And that's a thing to address if you want to change the dynamics of what's happening here.
R&D every year is more than we collectively in Europe invest in R&D in the business.
Buy the innovation. I mean, when was the last time there's a real innovation came out of them where when you dig into it, they didn't buy it? You know, Android, they did buy it, you know? Like, this is true for many technologies. So, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't say you're wrong. They do put in a lot of money, of course, but that's because they make near monopoly profits. That's why they have the money. So that's something to address. I mean, in theory, government should regulate the market. It's hard to do that, of course. But I think there's a role there for government, not to throw subsidies at projects, but rather to make sure the market functions well. I think that's more effective than trying to subsidize, European initiative. I mean, there needs to be support from government too, of course, but I think there's a place for a stronger oversight, like we've done with the GDPR. And now the DMA, the DSA, I think this can be helpful.
We have, and picks up what you're saying, in Europe we do good things, we do really interesting, and the circles that I move in, the stuff that goes on is fascinating, and it's really cutting edge and exciting, and I can see why it's going to change everything, except we keep on looking inwards. And while we're kind of going, well, look, isn't this really fun what we're working on over here? China is, 10 times ahead of us. And as you mentioned, the investment, so the edge tech, the battle for the edge, it's called a battle for the edge, that's what we want it to be. Google alone is spending 15 times what the whole EU is spending on developing these areas. So there's that imbalance that's corrected it. I do think there's a change amongst Europeans in terms of how they view these large organisations, and that's coming around. I think younger people will see them a bit more like they used to see the banks. So in the 90s, if you wanted to be cool and rich, you were a banker. And then in the 2000s, you hated the banks. So you wanted to be cool and rich, you wanted to work for Google. And now we're into, actually, they're not good guys either, so I don't know where we're going to go into next. But we do need to replicate the Nokia in Europe, where Nokia produced and kept and retained talent. That talent then led on to the Nokia Ericsson era that we had, the late 80s, early 90s, which we lost to the US digital. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But we have to come back with it in some way, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but we do need to stop looking inside and keep an eye on what's going on around us. It's very critical. And the policy, sorry, just very quickly, there's never enough time. The policy that you're talking about, bringing in the digital market, which is heavy-handed way of trying to fix, it's market fixing, it's a correction. So it's market correction we're trying to do. But what also is happening with the Data Act and the AI Act and the Future Cyber Resilience Act and the Standardization Act and whatever else is coming, the 6 of them, as we just did an analysis for the IoT sector, is really interesting because that's going to create a whole new skill set to comply. And the compliance around all of these, not so much the Digital Markets Act, that's more, do what you're supposed to do, But the Data Act is going to require new interfaces, new ways of people that can look at how they use data and literacy around that, which is going to change how we do it. So we need to also look at the policy implications for the skills demand that's going to come around that. And that is non-technical roles coming into the technical space. And the Commission at the moment is hiring hundreds of lawyers to deal with the Digital Markets and Digital Services Act, because they don't have the competence. They're bringing in hundreds in that way. But business is going to have to bring in that technical expertise now as well to understand what they can do with these. And if they are a distributor, the IT sector is going to have to really shake up how it views its operation.
Okay, so thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I would like to invite if you'd like to have any questions for the panelists. If not, I will just make the final question. So, anyone with there?
Thank you, Enrique. I would like to pick up on the point where were raised by Carla and commented by Joss about the fact that maybe 60% of the company are doing wrong. I'm not exactly so sure, because I think there is one thing that was not discussed about the implication of what is supposed to be the implication of IT for digital transformation. And I think the kind of stupid example, if you want, is what happens when a company like Autostrade in Italy invests on IT. So now you have a lot of people that when you pay the ticket, are there collecting the ticket, right? So if you invest on IT and you bring inside IT skills, probably means you don't need any more of those people, right? And the scale of impact of maybe 4 or 5 people IT team that might be whatever salary cost is massive compared to the number of ticket points for the whole highway network, right? So it's a trade balance, right? And this is probably the case for most of the data-driven companies. I mean, maybe now people are doing a lot of things manually with Excel, whatever, and then you need, I don't know, many analysts. And then if you have people on the IT side can manage most of the automation, maybe you cut down a lot the analysts. And then in the end, if you count the head global company, head count total, you have reduced that. So I'm not sure it's just outsourcing is the benefit.
Anyone would like to take the question?
I mean, I think there are different models that fit for different companies. So I also would not agree that the 60% are wrong, but I think they can learn something on, that they need to move into higher levels of automation as well. So thank you for the point.
I think the 60% was more of an advocate of the devil play. I think there's definitely, I think the benefits that you mentioned, like having in-house knowledge. I mean, I would never get rid of all the in-house knowledge, because then the external consultants, will just tell you what's good for them, not for you. Right? Right, yes.
Okay, I think that we are running out of time. I have more questions to you, but we will get next time. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. I really appreciate that we have great panelists. So congratulations from my side, and please have a great applause to all of them. Thank you.